All right. How are we all today? I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes, see if anybody else jumps on live, and then we will kick off. If you have any questions or concerns, just pop it in the chat and we will go from there. Get the rest of everything ready. All right, everyone, let's kick off today. My name is Maddie, and I am the Clinical Service Manager and Accredited Mental Health Worker here at Mindful Recovery Services. Um, Part of what I do here is ADHD work. I also have ADHD and it is a special interest of mine. And today we're going to be focusing on ADHD and perimenopause, and the perfect storm and how to survive it. So we know now that ADHD as a diagnosis, is more of an emotional regulation issue than it is a attention issue or a discipline issue. And we're starting to find out that women who are approaching their 40s, even into their 50s, things are changing and it's really hard. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what perimenopause is, what ADHD is, and when we combined them, I guess some of the issues that we face as ADHD women. And then I'm going to give you lots of tips and tricks to hopefully reduce the overwhelm around that. So let's kick it off. And of course, I have the first tech issue. There we go. So the perfect storm, ADHD and perimenopause, and this is what people don't really know. So estrogen does a lot of work when it comes to dopamine. So it pretty much does triple duty, right? So it manages our dopamine production. It manages the dopamine maintenance, so it keeps our dopamine receptors healthy. And it manages our dopamine breakdown, so it controls how fast you use it up, right? Um, which is great. We need those things. But unfortunately, with ADHD, we already have very low dopamine. And perimenopause cuts dopamine in half. So we're already starting with about, you know, if we want to put it in percentages, which is not really the way it works, but if we're starting with like 20% dopamine, when we hit perimenopause, it goes down to 10. So pretty much nil. Unfortunately, the results are 70% of women experience life-altering symptoms. So things like depression, anxiety, not being able to sleep, behavioral changes that they've never experienced before. And for those of us that are late diagnosed, like myself, or are still going through the diagnosis process or thinking about diagnosis, these are all really big things. And as we know, the research, it's pretty stark. So 70% of women with ADHD say their symptoms become life-altering in their 40s and 50s. And that's 7 out of 10. So this is not a rare occurrence. This is something that we're seeing across the board. Um, it's almost like you wake up one day and you're 16 again. Because with the drop of estrogen and then the drop of dopamine, we kind of really need some help. So why? Why is it so missed? Why are we misdiagnosing women? And why are so many women in their 40s and 50s talking about ADHD as a possibility? Um, for women, it looks like anxiety, not hyperactivity. You know, as kids, we're not bouncing off the walls, we're not, throwing things or being that boisterous boy. We internalize a lot of the hyperactivity, and that causes anxiety, causes perfectionism, depression, and rumination. So we look stressed, not scattered. And I think that's where the difference is that we picture ADHD as this diagnosis and this mental health condition where we are unorganized and we can't hold anything together and we're running from one thing and another. That's actually not the case. Most high performing women who have ADHD look like they have it all together on the outside, but internally, that's where we're struggling. Welcome to some of our latecomers. No worries. We've just kind of kicked off. We're just talking about what ADHD looks like in women and why it keeps getting missed. So the results with that is misdiagnosis. So we show up to a GP, we're like, oh my God, I'm not displaying any of these symptoms. Sorry, I'm just admitting people. So we've got a few latecomers. That's totally fine. Hello, everybody. If you have any questions, pop it in the chat and we will talk about it a little bit later. Um, so yeah, because we look stressed, not scared, right? So misdiagnosis as anxiety and depression. I've seen misdiagnoses of BPD. I've seen misdiagnoses of, oh, it's just your period. Perimenopause breaks our coping systems. And if you are already not diagnosed, what we are finding in the research that's coming out is that if you were not diagnosed as a child and you seem to have it all together, usually when we have children, or if not children, when we hit perimenopause, which is kind of like our second puberty, that is where the symptoms start. So it's kind of like the estrogen has been masking all the issues with the dopamine and the function, and it's kind of all out in the open for everybody to see. So here's the thing. Late diagnosis. So the average woman in Australia at the moment is getting diagnosed at 43, which is wild, but it's good because having a late diagnosis is incredibly powerful in your 40s and 50s. And I also want to note here too that not everybody might need a formal diagnosis, right? You might just need some information where you've pretty much kind of self-diagnosed. You don't necessarily want medication, but you want all the tips and tricks. This is where self-diagnosis can also be relevant. All right, so what's actually happening in our body? So, obviously, we have a monthly cycle, and we know our normal cycle. It's follicular, and this is where it's going to get me because the wording with my ADHD, I do have a bit of a stutter. But the follicular, the ovulation peak, the luteal, and then menstruation. And we know it usually comes between every 28 to 35 days. We can organize around that. We can have a predictable rhythm and we can plan harder weeks. So if we know our period's coming up, we might not book events and all those kinds of things. It really just depends on how your cycle runs for you. Now, perimenopause, this is where things go a little bit askew. So when we're looking at the perimenopause cycle, we're looking at about 35 to 50 days. So it's a very unpredictable ovulation. There's no windows of relief. It's just your body, your biological body is going through chaos, and that's also going to have an impact on our brain. So with women with ADHD, we see extended periods of low dopamine, unpredictable crashes, and no recovery time. So the body isn't able to replenish what it's losing. And that's why it's so hard, right? So what does this actually look like in real life? So so this study was done in 2022 from the ADD Association in the States. So we know, so 4,000 women were surveyed who have ADHD. So things like 70% reported life-altering impact during the 40s and 50s, 79% struggling with procrastination and time management. And these are big things that they have never struggled with before. Working memory. So being able to remember what you have for breakfast, but also when your kids ask you something about school, or when your husband or your partner asks you something about, oh, that thing we spoke about 2 weeks ago, you're going to have more of a struggle being able to pull that working memory to the forefront in the present. And that's got a lot to do with the way that the dopamine and estrogen interact with each other. Serious overwhelm. And unfortunately, for ADHD women, we are 1.8 times more likely to experience severe perimenopause symptoms. And 1.63 times more likely to experience higher psychological symptoms, which come with comorbidities. So things like depression and anxiety, even things like a increase in drug and alcohol use, an increase of behaviors like smoking, things that, or eating lollies, things that maybe we had as a treat or something that we did occasionally. It starts to become more and more because our body is sensory seeking. Um, and unfortunately, we're 2.2 times more likely to have somatic symptoms. So things like night sweats, sleep deprivation, hot flashes, all of those kinds of things. So it's not a great prognosis, but I promise you there's things that we can do to kind of work with our ADHD and perimenopause. So unfortunately, and this is kind of what we're saying, is that you didn't draw a short straw, you drew the significantly shorter one. And unfortunately, that is just to do with the biology of the brain. And I really think it's important as we talk about this is to really highlight the hidden risks of not only women who are diagnosed with ADHD, but those that aren't and are approaching perimenopause, because ADHD as a diagnosis is probably one of the ones that come with the most comorbidities due to it being an emotional regulation and dopamine issue. So when we look at women in particular, so we know that 66% of women with ADHD experience significant PMS or PMDD, um, and also have the higher risk of postpartum depression after childbirth. So even if you're sitting here listening to this webinar or know someone who experienced really bad postpartum, has come out the other side of that amazing, but is now struggling in peri, you might find there may be some possibilities that there might be something else going on there and it's not just normal hormones. So one of the biggest comorbidities that I find personally, wild is 35% of cardiology patients have ADHD compared to 5% of the general population. So not only does our ADHD, and the dopamine, there's issues there with working memory and the way that we do things and how we feel about ourselves and emotional regulation, but there's actual physical health complications when it comes to ADHD. So it's really important that we look at the bigger picture. So it's not just about what our mind needs, it's also about what our body needs. And women with ADHD develop cardiovascular issues 2 years earlier than men. So there's some pretty scary stats, and I'm really not trying to scare you with this, but it's about being proactive and empowering you guys to make those informed decisions about how your mental health is going and if that's impacting any other areas of your life. And early detection of ADHD, early detection. And when I talk about early detection for women, really early detection at the moment is in your 30s. So that's where the prognosis is. We are seeing it get better with the younger people, which is great. But like I said, the average age for a woman to get diagnosed is 43. Early detection can change outcomes. Knowing that you have ADHD, if you are in peri, can be so important to the way we manage our symptoms and the way in which we're able to then move freely through our life. All right. So why diagnosis matters. And again, the caveat on this is like diagnosis includes self-diagnosis. So being able to, say confidently that, yes, I do have this. Because diagnosis can be financially not viable, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, but hopefully the resources that I give you here today, you can go and have a little bit of a try and see if it helps. So obviously access to treatment is one of the biggest things for ADHD. So medication available for ADHD can only be given with an actual diagnosis. And we also know that ADHD medication is one of the most effective mental health medications on the market, because it actually does what it says it's going to do, boosts the dopamine in the body, which improves all of this stuff like working memory, disorganized thinking, emotional regulation. It can really help bring us back to baseline to then work on the skills we need. Also, as well, during perimenopause, we know that working in combination with HRT and medication for ADHD can be really pertinent. So understanding, right? Trying to understand ourselves. We're already going through a massive biological shift, which we have no choice over, unfortunately. So, instead of it coming from the viewpoint of why can't I get it together? Everybody else has it together. Everybody else is working, everybody else is raising kids, everybody's doing this and doesn't seem to be struggling. But being able to kind of sit there and go, it's actually my neurology, it's my biology, I'm going to work with it instead of against it. That self-blame changing to self-compassion can be the biggest game changer in the way that we treat ADHD, right? Validation is so important, and self-validation is probably the hardest, but once you get there, it really helps. Accommodations. So through work, like you might need remote work, flexible hours, focused time, the ability to leave early on certain days if you don't have anything major on, like being able to advocate for yourself and your needs to be the best person that you are. Obviously, we look at comorbidity monitoring. So, postpartum, obviously, most of us will hopefully be over that hump in our 40s and 50s. But if you're planning on having children in your 40s, it's something to look out for. Cardiovascular risk, but also things like depression, anxiety, PMDD, all of those things. So, realistically, it just unlocks more support for women, right? And we are so bombarded with everything every day that sometimes a diagnosis is going to give us what we need. Sorry about that. So, lots of information, and I do understand it's heavy. I've tried really hard to not make the first half of this a downer, but unfortunately, the comorbidities that come with peri and ADHD are quite intense. And I think the more that we're learning about it as women, not only about our own bodies, but the way in which our diagnosis can impact that, it gives us more control and power to make our own decisions. Um, so what do? We stop diagnosing the problem, right? We've established we either definitely have ADHD and have an official diagnosis, or this is what we're thinking we have. And even if I don't need an official diagnosis, what's some tips and tricks I can start? So we start by building the solution, right? So skills to manage emotional chaos, strategies to support your brain, and a pathway that actually works. And throughout the next bit of this webinar, we're going to talk about some skills, but also how we implement that so it's not overwhelming for the ADHD brain. All right. So just before we start with the mindfulness skill, I just wanted to check, did anybody have any questions in the chat? All good if not. And if I am talking too quickly, please let me know. I tend to do that and I am sorry. Um, I just thought I'd ask. If not, that's all good. All righty. So let's get on to it. Mindfulness, the stop skill. So mindfulness and DBT is what underpins everything that we do. With the way we look at mindfulness for ADHD is it's a little bit different because obviously sitting there and being like for an hour is not always going to work. We talk a lot about habit stacking in the DBT groups that we do here, but also different ways to do mindfulness. So we're able to kind of just have a stop and a think. And sometimes that actually involves physically stopping as well as mentally stopping. So this particular skill is a stop skill. Everybody's going to get a recording of this, so you can have these to kind of share. I don't know if you have clients of your own or if it's just for personal use. These are all really good. Also, as well, if you have kids, any of these skills are amazing to teach them emotional regulation. Um, so real example. So we're going to talk about, what would happen if you got an email from your boss, right? And it was like, we need to talk. That is anxiety inducing within itself. So instead of replying straight away and spiraling, what we're actually going to do is stop. We're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to do it physically and mentally, and we're going to take a step back. Now, when I do this skill, I do it literally. I literally take it. I will get up out of my chair and take a step back because the connection of movement with the brain when it comes to ADHD is so important. So if we're able to add any sort of movement that's going to help with these skills, it's going to make them probably 10 times more effective. Um, Observe, right? What are we feeling? What's in my body? What are my thoughts? So are we having feelings of, oh my God, like that can't be, a good thing, and you start to spiral. And, if depending on what you do for a job, there might be some forms of rumination or procrastination that comes with that. Just being able to kind of sit with that a little bit. And then we want to proceed mindfully. So, what do I actually need to do next? Do I need to reply to this email straight away? Can I give it a couple of days? Can I, you know, talk to my boss and not email back defensively? All of those kinds of things. So, just it's taking the pause. And sometimes with our ADHD brains, the pause is the hardest part, right? And when we're working with the loss of estrogen, it's going to make it even harder. So being able to implement a stop skill, so we're just able to take that pause, the result will be, more beneficial than if we just reacted, right? So the result is the relationship's preserved, the solution's found. Um, and I like to use this skill, especially in practice, as often as I can. And it might even be that it might be a Saturday and you've got like 30,000 things to do on your list. And it's like, okay, let's just stop for a second and go through the skill. Like, what is actually important today? What do I have capacity for? And move through that. So we're building the muscle of noticing and taking notice of our own feelings around that. All right, let's talk about crisis relief. So this is about when we are at a 10 out of 10, or in DBT, we rate everything out of five. So it's 5 out of 5. So pretty much what happens is when we go into overwhelm, our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain, goes completely offline. So we can't make rational decisions. We can't make good decisions. And a lot of the time we make very big emotional decisions without taking into account the reality or even that intellectual thinking around it. So what we say in DBT is when in doubt, start with tip. So these are all designed to bring our physiological body down so that prefrontal cortex comes online and we can make better, decisions moving forward. Um, and you can use this at any time. So we talk about temperature. So I'm not necessarily talking about ice baths. I'm more talking about a splash of cold water or holding ice. And this activates what's called the dive response. So if you have an ice pack or even a very cold face washer, the idea is the face washer over your face and we want to bend down. And I know that can sound really weird, but we want to intimidate. We want to copy the idea of diving, right? So when we activate our dive response, all mammals have something in their body that goes, oh no, we're like going to die from drowning. So we're going to reduce the heart rate and we're going to do that really quickly. So pretty much what happens is instead of us continuing to escalate, our body actually goes down. So it's very helpful in those moments where we are trying not to spiral into some sort of panic. Look, you could do it in a minute. If you can do it over 3 to 5, that's great. What I will say about the tip skills is you want to practice these when you're not at a 5 out of 5. You want to try doing this at a, baseline and then building up to it. The second one is intense exercise. So 20 to 30 minutes of vigorous movement. I have lots of clients that choose this. They might put their, shoes at the door when they're feeling overwhelmed. They go for a quick run. So other people, run up and down the stairs inside their house. Kitchen dancing is another one. Essentially anything that's going to get that heart rate up to about a 7 out of 10. This one is obviously one that you need a little bit more time for. Um, Again, give it a go, see what happens. Not my first choice, that's for sure. And that's okay. So let's, oh, hang on, I've accidentally opened up the full screen and I can see everyone. Give me 2 seconds. Mm. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So the next one is paced breathing. Well, the next two is paced breathing and paired muscle relaxation. So we can definitely do these separately, but they do work really well together. So essentially, paced breathing is inhaling and then exhaling for longer than you inhaled. So usually we go 3 seconds on an inhale, 6 seconds on an out. If you can do it for longer, amazing. The reason why we teach paced breathing and not like deep breath breathing is that if you're already overstimulated or anxious or feeling overwhelmed, if you start taking in deep breaths, you can, and not always, but there is a possibility you can send yourself into a panic attack. So we want to ensure that with our paced breathing, it is just in for four. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's out for six. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So those longer exhales just activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So just everything kind of calms back down to baseline. This is a really good one when you're in a stressful situation at work, you can't leave, if you are, busy shopping centers, somewhere that you are that you can't actually get out of. Pace breathing and muscle relaxation are the two that are going to probably help the most. And paired muscle relaxation within itself, fabulous as well. So all we want to do is find a paired muscle. So it can be both of your hands. And then we just want to hold them. And I've written 5 seconds here because, as ADHD is time as a concept is hard, but if you could hold it for 20 and then release, right? And if we do that continuously with the paced breathing, that's really going to bring everything back down to baseline to be able to put that prefrontal cortex back online. And with this, that's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to solve an issue. We're not trying to, make any decisions. We are just trying to take a minute to kind of ground ourselves again. It buys you time, right? So ensuring that we're not saying things that we're going to regret, ensuring that we're not reacting to things in a way that maybe our hormones are taking over and it's not just, on the fly. And then we want to solve after that. What I will say is most women are pretty good in a crisis. So, you know, we might need to do this after the crisis is over. All right. Now we're going to talk about, so please, which is our physical health. Now, when we talk about diet is not going to eradicate your ADHD, but it definitely supports and helps it. In DBT, we talk about the please skill, and that's all about our physical health. Essentially, if we're having a really bad day mentally, or if we've had a really big argument with somebody that we love, or if we're having a internally, storm-filled day, I guess, with the estrogen and the dopamine not doing what it's supposed to do. We want to make sure all of these things are kind of going well because that's what we can control, right? So PL is just around treating physical illness. Sorry, I just my laptop on charge. Don't want to cut that out halfway through. Um, so obviously that's taking care of our body. Do you have a cold? Are we sick? Are we taking our medication if we have it? And are we taking it when we're supposed to? That's also really important to kind of check off when we're looking at our physical health in this. Balanced eating, are we eating regularly, which I know is really hard for a lot of ADHDers. And with perimenopause too, hunger is one of those things that can either rise or it can almost reduce completely. So obviously, if we're taking stimulant medications, for our ADHD, that's also something that needs to be looked at. So we'll talk a little bit more in the next coming slides about how to increase some of our nutrition as ADHDers because food can be very hard. So yeah, that balanced eating, avoiding mood altering substances. So like, are you doing lots of drugs? Are you drinking lots? We want to make sure that those things are, either not at all or, lowered. Balanced sleep. They're saying 7 to 9 hours. I'm a true believer. If you are in perimenopause and have ADHD, if you're getting 6, that's really good. And exercise, daily exercise. And we'll talk more a little bit about that because we want to come at it from the lens working with our ADHD, not against it. Now, I didn't mention before, but one thing that is important to know is that ADHD is we run on an interest-based nervous system. So essentially what that means is that we won't do anything unless it's interesting. And obviously we're adults, so we have managed to put routines in place and things in place to help us do the things we don't enjoy doing. But your nervous system runs on interest, and that's really important to know. So we'll talk more about that. So building resilience before crisis. Sorry. So when we look at ABC, we want to look at our emotional building, right? So we want to, in our days, accumulate positive emotions. So one thing daily for me personally, and it's a non-negotiable in my budget and in my life, I love a good coffee in the morning and I will buy one. And that is just like my little tick off. And it makes me feel good. And also it builds dopamine. I know this now because I'm late diagnosed. But essentially it's giving myself that little boost before I have to do all of those hard things throughout the day. And that could be different for everybody. It could be music, it could be movement, it could be a sweet treat, it could be a drink, it could be journaling. It's really up to you to find kind of what's going to help with those positive emotions throughout the day. Um, Obviously, when we look at B, it's about building mastery. So, one thing daily that makes you capable, right? And we want to build on top of that. So, instead of trying to do all of the things at once, we want to do small things where we can control. And then obviously coping ahead. So we know within this period of our life, we are going to be emotionally up and down a little bit more than normal. And we want to try and anticipate some of those hard times. So is it that like once a month you carve out time to go spend some time by yourself or, just having things that are yours? And I know that that can be really hard, especially if we're mothers or working adults, but also as well, carving out time for ourselves will make us better for ourselves and everybody else. Um, and that's where that coping ahead comes from. And then we want to name it, right? We can't take control of our emotions unless we actually name them. We need to put a name to things for our brain to recognize what's actually happening. And that's got to do with the working memory of ADHD. And when you name an emotion, it activates our prefrontal cortex. It's our thinking brain and reduces our amygdala, which is our fight or flight, right? If we're able to actually identify, so instead of saying things like, I'm upset, say things, I'm frustrated and disappointed because sometimes we won't know the reason as to why, but if we can just start with the feeling, or even vice versa, we might know why we're frustrated, like upset, but we can't name the emotion. And this is just about connecting the reason with the emotion, and that's just going to help our internal kind of rhythm with everything. Saying I'm anxious, but what does that actually mean? I'm worried about messing up and restless about the unknown. It could be that, or I'm feeling really anxious today. Mine was, I am anxious because I'm running a webinar and I know I talk fast, but that's okay. Saying I'm angry. Now, anger is such an important emotion, but it is a secondary one. So we know that under anger, there's usually all this other stuff, and it's usually around being disrespected, being hurt by somebody, not being heard, um, scared about relationship damage, especially if there's been internal conflict around this time. So, why does it work? So, it's about specificity, clarity, and need to know what you need, and then you can get it. If you're able to identify, it's going to help other people around you identify too and support. Um, and as well, when you're dysregulated, being able to name an emotion can really activate the prefrontal cortex, kind of does the same as tip, right? It brings us down a little bit to be able to be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm actually feeling. I can deal with that and then move forward with our day. All right. So how do we do this, right? And that's the biggest thing. So this is a scenario. So bad perimenopause day, you wake up with brain fog, no motivation, everything's hard. You might have managed to get out of bed and go to work, and then you're exhausted by the time you get home. And then your partner turns around and says, can we go to this work event tonight? And you say you can't because of the day you've had, and they're upset, right? Now, this doesn't happen for everybody, but for some people it does. And this is what I'm seeing across the board. So without some skills, there is a reaction. It's snappy. You can get defensive, then they get defensive. And then because you got defensive, you're going to spiral. It's the rumination. And that's where the ADHD plays its biggest part in all of this is that internalized shift of, oh my God, I am the worst human being ever because I can't deal with whatever's out here. And then the evening's ruined and we just go from there, right? Obviously, we are all human. Even if, like myself, have a toolkit full of skills, things were still going to happen. But with skills, we're able to pause and notice overwhelm, obviously enact tip if we are super, super overwhelmed. When we're able to name it, like saying, hey, babe, like I'm exhausted. I've got all this anxiety about disappointing you, but I really need rest and I don't think I can make it. Also being able to check our ABC, please, right? Have I eaten today? Did I get enough sleep? Have I moved? Have I actually fed myself in whichever way I needed to? If I did some of those things, would I maybe want to go out? If not, that's okay. And then we're able to communicate that, hey, I'm having a hard day. What if we do something smaller this weekend? Happy for you to go to the event. I'm going to stay home. And the result is staying calm. We've stated what we clearly need. There's no confusion from anybody. There's no guilt spiral because we were able to identify and come at it with a bit more, reasoning in our own brain. And then the problem's solved. Now, that would be great. And usually that's the way it goes. What I will say is that we can be as skillful as we want, but not everybody is as skillful as we are. So ensuring that we know that we've done the best we can is going to make the process of perimenopause with ADHD a lot easier, and give everybody around you that understanding of what's happening. So I've just got this slide in here. It's more for you guys if you want to take it home and kind of like start to implement it. But essentially, like I like to break it down. So we're not trying to do everything at once, right? So we want to use week one just to master a stop skill. And then week two, maybe we can try some tip stuff. Week three, let's look at our please skills and our ABCs. And week four, we start to use them all together. Now, continuously over 2 to 3 months, if we are implementing some of these things, the ADHD, I mean, brains in general love repetition, right? ADHD brains love it even more. And if we can add it in with novelty, like, oh, we might be doing tip with the kids, or we can do, some ABC skills around positive emotions and make it really fun and exciting. So being able to have all these things, it does not need motivation, because the more that we practice, the more the brain just starts to recognize, oh, hang on, I'm getting this feeling. So I might be feeling anxious and the anxiety starts to rise. So your body automatically starts to do paced breathing. The more you practice, the more automatic it will be. And that's so important about ADHD brains. Sleep. Sleep is the biggest lever. So, essentially, sleep deprivation can cascade. So, if you have ADHD, you're probably not sleeping enough anyway. Add perimenopause on top of this, and you know, sleep deprivation for night one, two. We are a little bit irritable. By week four, it can look like depression, anxiety, cardiovascular stress. Like it has a bigger impact, and we're told this. It's hard, right? What I find works for ADHD brains and trying to get into some sort of different routine is consistency. And that means same bedtime and wake up time. And if that is the thing you start with, and I mean consistent as in all 7 days. So if you are getting up at 6 o'clock on a work day, then on Saturday and Sunday, maybe getting up at 6, it's important because ADHDs need that consistency and routine. Obviously, if we want to sleep in, that's really good. All those kinds of things. Like this is not, this needs to be done. You're going to adjust it to your life and lifestyle. Obviously, we want a bit of a wind down routine. So, 30 minutes off tech. I wish I could say that that was something I'm good at, but it's not. I put my phone in a different room at night. So I'm not, when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, don't just start scrolling. Also around like looking at your bedroom environment. Is it cool enough? Is it dark enough? Do we want something that is going to occupy our mind if we're not on the tech scrolling? So audiobooks, podcasts, low volume, those kinds of things that can help with the rumination at nighttime. Weighted blanket, herbal teas. This is all kind of all those things that are going to help with the dopamine and the estrogen just managing, right? Um, Now, if you're like me and waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's fabulous. Don't go to your phone. So we want to have some sort of boring activity. For me personally, I just have like a notepad next to my bed and I'll just write down some stuff. Usually I'll end up going back to sleep. Um, what I will say is if you're waking up and can't go to sleep, get out of bed. You don't have to go do something, but get out of bed and then kind of reset and try again. Now, all of this is peer reviewed, evidence based, right? So I put it in there. Caffeine afternoon. I don't know about you. As an ADHD woman, I drink caffeine until the days come home, cows come home. I know if I don't have it after 3, though, my sleep is a lot better. So just do what works for you. Um, yeah, and they're saying 7.5 to 8 hours for a sweet spot for ADHD women. My advice is like, look, if you're getting 6, you're winning, in my opinion. All right. Now, movement. So, the research, it's really not optional and it kind of sucks. So 30 minutes of vigorous movement, we increase the dopamine, right? Dopamine loves movement and vice versa. Essentially, there was a 12-week exercise trial done, Cohen's D, and 0.89% of women, um, that should be 89% of women, not 0.89, my apologies, um, movement and exercise at least 5 times a week is so important with ADHD and perimenopause. Symptoms are reduced like 40% and improves the working memory and focus. So we know that it works. The problem is dopamine doesn't like doing things that we don't want to do. And this is when I talk about that interest-based nervous system, right? We have to work with our ADHD. It's not laziness, it's your low dopamine, and you can't rely on motivation. So you need to rely on systems. So set some things up that are going to work for you. For me personally, I know if I have to show up for someone when it comes to exercise, I'm more likely to go. So I have a gym buddy, makes it work. And also, we want novelty. The ADHD brain lives off that. So, not the same routine and workout every day. So, you might do a dance class or 2 times strength training and something new. It could be hike one day, walking the dog another day, and then strength training 3 times a week. Like it's whatever is going to work for you. But if we can at least get half an hour of movement in your day, amazing. Um, and I really don't care. You can dance in your kitchen for 20 minutes a day and it would do the same thing. I don't care how you're getting your movement, just try to get it. Um, and avoid peak heat for perimenopause because we don't want to overheat, and also water, all those things. And nutrition. So fuel for the brain chemistry. Look, we need extra energy. ADHD brains do. And food can be so hard, which is just a great kind of combination. So protein is going to be your best friend. My advice to most of my clients, and this is something I do myself, if you can get 30 grams of protein within the hour after you waking up, it will do wonders for the rest of your day. Even if you don't take medication, it's going to just be the baseline where your dopamine sits. So protein shake. I've got clients that eat nuggets. Like I don't care how you get your protein in, as long as you get it. And that's the thing. So protein, fat, complex carbs at every meal. Because as well, if we don't have fat in our diet, especially going through perimenopause, it's really going to impact our hormone function. So there's just a few specific nutrients for dopamine if you are interested. And then blood sugar stability too. So if our blood sugar's off, our dopamine is going to run wild, which means that our perimenopause symptoms are going to be worse. So I find eating smaller meals throughout the day works for me. I have like a snack box that I take to work. If you are big on 3 meals a day, it's going to be whatever works for you, but we want to make sure that we're getting enough nutrition. Um, when it comes to hydration, 3 to 4 liters a day, which seems like a lot, but if you're drinking tea or juice, coffee can count. Obviously, there is, the bits and pieces, but if you drink black coffee, there is still fluid in there. But we also know that coffee is also, it dehydrates us, so we don't want to be drinking too much. And just a couple of my ADHD specific facts for nutrition. So meal prep like a chef. So we're not actually prepping full meals, because that's going to bore us if we're going to eat things 5 days out of the week that are the same. So we want to cook three different types of proteins, three carbs, three veg, and then we just mix and match throughout the week. And that can be for lunch and dinners. Um, it eliminates the decision paralysis, which unfortunately does get worse in peri. And it's less work during the week. So if you could take, say 2 to 3 hours out, one day a week, to meal prep like that, it's going to save you so much time throughout the week. All right. So this is just also if you guys would like to go away and try it. Again, this is one of those things like with the skills, we don't want to try and change everything at once. ADHD is a very well known for all or nothing, and with this approach, we kind of just want to dial it back slightly. So weeks 1 and 2, we focus on sleep, and you can do this in whatever order. um you know Track it. Visual trackers are going to be so important if you want to build a different routine as an ADHD, and as well in perimenopause, because we won't have the same working memory as maybe that we did previously, right? We're not able to pull back on some of that memory as quickly as we used to, so having it visual, writing it down, having it on a calendar, it's really going to help. Adding in some movement. Start with 1 day a week if we're not doing any exercise. And if you are doing exercise, can we pick a different activity so we don't get as bored? Those kinds of things. And that's going to ensure that we have longevity in these things. Um, you know, Pick one meal to kind of switch up. Breakfast is usually the hardest, because dopamine, and I don't know if you guys know this, also impacts our hunger cues. So breakfast in the morning is really hard, but it is going to be the most beneficial. And again, not all at once. We don't want to set ourselves up for failure. This is about long-term skill building. And if we try and do it all at once, we're more likely not to succeed. And for the ADHD brain in particular, that is going to cause us not to want to try again. So this is what we've covered today. So the why. We've got some skills. Looking at, and especially with the skills, right, give them a go and see if for yourself or your loved ones, there is a reduction in emotional reactivity. Track it if that's going to help you. Make it a bit gamified if you feel like that might be. It's like, I'm going to practice stop skills this week, and at the end of the 7 days, I'm going to reward myself, with whatever that might be. Again, small steps for big changes. And I just really, really want to drive this home is that your brain is not broken. It is going through a biological shift. And you're not alone. We know now that like 70% of women who are going into perimenopause have either discovered their ADHD or already have, are experiencing what we're all going through. And there is a path forward. Diagnosis, support, strategies, community, all of these work. If you have ADHD and are going through perimenopause, and you are feeling very alone, reaching out to, yes, obviously the women in our community that you might know that have already gone through it, but also online support groups. There's lots of Facebook groups that are very supportive. If you are interested in anything like that, you can give me an email and I can send you as many resources as possible. I love sharing my information with everybody. Um, so I just want you to know that there is a way out, right? It sounds scary and there's a lot of comorbidities, but when it comes to peri, it is manageable, and working with our ADHD can make it so much more easier. And that is all we have today. I just wanted to also note that we are launching here at Mindful Recovery Services ADHD therapy specific, within a DBT undertone, but also ADHD pre-diagnostic packages. So if you think you've got ADHD or know someone who might be interested, we're trying to do it for as low cost as possible and making it more accessible to the wider, public, without hours and months of wait lists, right? So essentially, this package is going to be for pre-diagnosis. So it is everything that you need to take to the psychiatrist to confirm a diagnosis for ADHD. If you are interested in any more information about that, you can give us a call, jump on our website, or email me personally, and I'd be happy to walk you through that. But we've got 10 minutes. If anybody had any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, I'm happy for you to email me privately also. Um, so I might just give everybody a couple minutes to kind of see if there's any questions. And then if not, that is all for today. No worries. No worries, guys. Look, so if you've signed up, you're going to get the recording of this. If you do try anything and it does work, I love feedback. So please let me know. And like I said, yes, yes. Look, Brecky, my advice to you, protein shake, is just like it's the easiest and quickest way if you can find one. But start there and hopefully things can change. But like I said, if you guys, you'll get the recording, you can try some things. If you have any questions later, please feel free to reach out. We want to be here to support everybody. And if you're looking for anything kind of further and more information, give us a call and we can see how we can help. But it's been lovely spending the hour with everybody, and I hope to talk to you all soon. Thanks so much.